All right, so here's a few news links. So the CDC, the United States did not have any tests for coronavirus, and then we got them. And so for some reason, they tested this woman 3 times. And when the first 2 results came in negative, they let her go and she went off to the mall and restaurants and stuff. And then the 3rd one came in positive. They're like, wait a minute, what's wrong with you idiots? I mean, you give them testing, you don't wait for the answers. And now they're trying to track down all the people she came in contact with and so on. That's why somebody was asking me a couple of days ago with this cold I've had, do you think it's the coronavirus? And I said, well, I don't know. And I can't find out because I don't live in an advanced nation like China. I live in a backwards nation like America where there is no test for it, which is, you know, not the way it's supposed to be, but that's the way it is. And I remember another thing, I used to know a guy that was big with the funding agencies, the National Science Foundation. His big thing was broadband penetration. And he said, like 5 years ago, the United States had fallen from #1 down to #19 in broadband penetration, and we fall every year. The number of people who actually have access to broadband is like 2/3 of us or something, but it's way below other nations. And there's 2 problems. One is that we're really all sprawled out, so you have to lay more miles of cable. And the other one is we were here first, so there is a dial-up networking infrastructure, which is good enough every year, so they decide not to upgrade. Other nations that never built the dial-up networking just laid fiber in the first place. And places like South Korea, they just all live in Japan, they all live packed in huge cities, so it takes many less miles of cable to give them all broadband. But that's why for a long time, everybody had 100 megs over there, and we over here had like 1 meg. Now anyway, this is a kind of, I suppose, partly why Trump's message works. In a lot of ways, America is not a leader anymore. We used to be a leader in technology, and we're not really that much a leader anymore, which is pretty disturbing. Anyway, so the United States government apparently funded people to get these phones, but they came with malware that you couldn't remove. And these guys reported it to them, and they just lied and said, you're making it up. And then they finally removed it. And they're still pretending it was never there and lying about it. But anyway, at least they managed to humiliate them. Malwarebytes managed to humiliate them into it. Malwarebytes is a pretty big player in this space. The other thing I know about Malwarebytes is they keep blocking my website. Twice so far, somebody will tell them my website is malicious, and then everybody in corporations, it blocks them because they're using Malwarebytes, and a lot of people seem to copy their database. So they seem very enthusiastic about blocking bad things. And it's hard to get off the block list, but I managed to do it twice so far. So this is interesting. This is North Korea, the Lazarus Group. So North Korea funds most of their government activities apparently by stealing money on the internet, mostly by stealing cryptocurrency from the cryptocurrency exchanges. They hack into them and they stole like $100 million of cryptocurrency, and then they had to launder it. And they laundered some of it by just going through churn through many different cryptocurrencies, but $1 million of it they laundered by buying Apple cards. Which I think is down here someplace. Apple iTunes gift cards. They bought $1.4 million of iTunes gift cards, which apparently you can use to buy cryptocurrency at some exchanges. So that's how they laundered it. So anyway, that's why there's a company that will help the cops find out what's been going on in the blockchain. On the Bitcoin blockchain, they try to reverse the Bitcoin blockchain and find out where the money went. And they sell this service to law enforcement because it's not really anonymous. Zcash works real hard to be anonymous. Bitcoin is not really all that anonymous. It's possible to reverse it. Anyway, so Xerox is buying HP with a hostile takeover. And HP is struggling hard not to get taken over, and it doesn't seem to be working. So apparently Xerox is going to forcibly buy up the shares and take over HP. I don't know why. It seems to me like HP went to hell 20 years ago and never came back there. They used to be great, like 35 years ago, but then the original founders, Hewlett and Packard, left, and the next generation of people just seem to cheapen the product and lose their way. But anyway, Xerox seems to want them, and apparently they're going to take them by force. So this is the proposal. Actually, drones, as far as I know, at least I heard a year ago, drones are not authorized for any use yet. You can't like rent a drone to somebody or fly a drone over their farm to find the holes in the fence or anything, because there's no way to get a license to use a drone for commercial purposes. Although I've heard some prototypes. So they're trying to figure out how to make laws about drones. And so this is the latest plan. They want it to be connected to the internet at all times. So it's constantly reporting its location. And if it somehow loses its connection, it has to land, because they want to have like lanes and speed limits or something and know it's not going where they're not supposed to go. And all the drone owners are totally freaking out because like 80% of drones cannot be connected to the internet and they would become useless. And all drones would get much more expensive. And this is really, really annoying. So they're arguing about it, but this is what's holding it up. The same thing with the flying cars. There are prototypes, but nobody can figure out what license you need, or what the speed limit would be, or what a stoplight would be, or how a cop could chase you and arrest you or anything. And they can't really legalize it until they have all that worked out. So another conference is now online only. I mean, I say I'm expecting the college to close soon. I haven't heard any word from the college, but other colleges are closing. They closed all the colleges, France and Japan, I think. And the number, now we're up to 6 deaths in coronavirus today. It was 2 yesterday and 1 the day before. So this is exactly what I thought. When you have a death there, and we haven't even had the ability to test for it, when the first person died, that means there's been 100 people out there for 2 weeks, just from the math. That means there's been 50 or 100 people wandering around for 2 weeks undetected until somebody finally died. And it's out of control already. And that's why, as I often do, I'm thinking, you know, Trump always makes everything as annoying as possible, but in a way he's right. It's nothing we can do except wait for it to just burn out with the seasons change. But I guess, anyway, they're going to try and track down people, but I think there's no hope, because even if we were organized, which we totally aren't, it has a lot of people with no symptoms carrying it. So I don't think there's any way you could possibly find the infected people and make sure they're all quarantined somewhere. Anyway, I think it is totally going to spread now, because I think we've totally passed all the time in which we could have contained it, if there ever was a time like that. And all the politicians are just scrambling to do something to give the appearance of having done something. But there is nothing they can do that would be effective, I think.
I saw an article in the paper the other day that said somebody over at Berkeley was talking about shutting down.
Yes, and I think Pence already said, they asked him, should colleges shut down? And he said, well, I'm leaving that to the local officials, but it is at their discretion. So I think, and San Francisco already declared a local state of emergency. So it really seems to me like the college is going to shut down soon. I think as soon as there's a few more cases in San Francisco, they'll do it. So anyway, when that happens, what I'm saying, I plan on just continuing the way I did when I was sick. I'll just connect by Zoom and keep going. But what will probably happen is the college might make it so you can't get official credit or something. That's why they've already been requested by the federal government. All the colleges have been requested to draw up plans to cope if they have to cancel the physical meetings. And so we'll see what happens. But anyway, that would be my plan. I just keep going regardless of the college's opinion. But if you actually want to get credit and financial aid and enough units and everything, then the administrative details will matter. And knowing them, I mean, this is technically a face-to-face class. So telling them I can do it online would perhaps not meet their administrative requirements. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Anyway, so here's the popular languages. This I thought was pretty important. And I was sort of annoyed. So here's the popularity of languages. JavaScript is #1 because of these new JavaScript frameworks like Angular and Node that are huge. Python is #2, Java, huge, PHP and C, then Ruby, and Go is all the way down here. I went and learned Go. Now I feel stupid. I guess I'm going to have to rewrite my stuff in Ruby or something. But anyway, like I say, all these exotic new languages are nowhere. I don't see Rust anywhere. Microsoft was talking about switching all their stuff to Rust, which would be huge. But Rust is not even in the top 20. Anyway, so when people tell me what language to use, I tell them, you know, Python, PHP, Java, JavaScript, those are the things to learn, or C. Those are the old standards that have been around for decades, and you can't go wrong with that stuff. Most of the people are still using the same old stuff. How many blooming languages do you need anyway? Everybody writes a new language for every purpose. I don't know why. Anyway, so today is the official day for you people to do presentations. So let me bring up the schedule here. And here we are. So today is the official time to do presentations. A few people did it early. How many people want to give presentations today? Okay, let me make a note. I'm going to make a list of them. And I thought there might be an issue there being too many, but now I'm thinking there won't be too many. So Caitlin, all right, and what's your name? J-I-L-L. A what? Jillian? Okay, Jillian, good. And I think I saw one online. Okay, Dante, good. And do you want to do it? Yeah, sure. Oh, what's your name? Dean? Dean? Dean. David, okay, good. Oh, good, I've seen you on the COOT list. Okay, good. All right, and is it okay to record you guys? Anybody care? People seem happy enough. Dante, I imagine. All right, good. So if there's only 4 of you, then there's no big issue. I'll just do the lecture as usual. We'll take a break and then do them. If you want to project slides, I would just do it through the Zoom. That seems to be the cool way to do it. No point messing around with cables or USB sticks or anything. All right, good. So that's easy enough. There's not going to be a huge rush of people doing it. So, all right, so let's talk about this stuff. We're up 1/3 of the way through the chapter 3, and so we'll just do another third of it. So this is the A+ part of the class, and then it's the Security Plus. Like I say, you already know a lot of this material, hopefully, from our other classes. So the kernel is the part of the operating system that has direct access to the hardware and has access to all the machine language instructions. There are monolithic kernels and microkernels. A monolithic kernel is where the whole thing is compiled into one static executable, and therefore, I think this is what, there's this old Linux version that people used to love, all the hackers used. I can't remember the name of it right now. Slackware, where if you want to put in a new application, you have to recompile the kernel every time. This is the old-fashioned way to do it. This is the fastest thing, but it is the least flexible. The microkernel is by far the more popular one. This is the general purpose, because if you want to add a new functionality, you don't need to recompile the kernel. You just add a loadable kernel module to it. So this is what things like Mac OS and Windows and normal multi-purpose operating systems use. It is big and messy and has a lot of extra code you're not using, and you can add code, but that makes it much faster to install new software. Now, there is a part of a computer called a reference monitor, and this is the military term. This is the part of the computer that enforces the security policy. We talked about this before. You have a state of the machine, and then you have transitions where data is moved from one location to another, that moves to another state, and you must have some part of the computer that makes sure that all those states are in conformity with the security policy and forbid changes that would violate security policy, and that thing is called the reference monitor. That's the technical term for it. All right, that's what you have to make it to A or B in the TCSec, the high levels. So as you know, Unix and Windows have this permission table where you have files and folders, and everything is owned by somebody, and the owners are in a group, and then you have read, write, and execute permissions for the owner, the group, and others. And some kind of permission structure like this is what the reference monitor is enforcing. When you try to do an action, it checks your permissions to see whether you're allowed to do that or not. Microsoft has these strange NTFS permissions: read, write, read and execute, modify, and full control, which is pretty screwy, a strange mixture of things, and it's even stranger than it looks. It's actually 14-bit wise binary permissions that it gathers into these 6 groups. It is far more complicated than read, write, and execute. I first saw this, I could not believe it. It behaves very strangely. Microsoft Windows permissions are very screwy, but they're very important in the real world, and you have to get used to them if you're going to do Microsoft security. So privileged programs are programs that run with more privileges than you have. So even if you're not the administrator, when you run this program, it runs with higher privileges. These are called setuid files in Linux, like password, that runs with temporarily elevating privileges so it can change the password file that a normal user is not allowed to get to. All right, and then we got virtualization and distributed computing. Virtualization is huge, especially in Docker containers. It turns out to save an incredible amount of money. At first, I thought it was stupid. When it came out in 2004, Microsoft Virtual PC, I said, this is just a way to simulate a computer on a computer. It runs really slow. It's buggy. Why would I even bother? This turned out to be incredibly useful. So there are 2 kinds, are full virtualization and para-virtualization. Full virtualization is what we have with VMware Workstation or VirtualBox, where you can simulate different hardware. Your virtual machine will appear to have a different hard disk, a different network card, even a different processor. And that therefore makes it relatively slow. Para-virtualization is what you use if you want to have faster virtual machines. The virtual machine now has identical hardware to the host machine, and it uses the same driver as the host machine. And if you go from virtualization to para-virtualization, your machines get smaller and faster and less flexible. And the next step along the same path is Docker containers, where you now have a thing called overlay FS, and you don't even have any files in the virtual machine that are identical to any files on the host. If a file in the virtual machine is equal to a file on the host, it doesn't make a second copy. They both just use the same file. So if you put like a Windows container on Linux, you're totally wasting your time. There's nothing in common. But if you put a Linux container on Linux, it's like an empty folder because it just uses the same files on the host. And when you install software, it just adds a few files to change the OS to whoever it has to change to a version of the OS with that software on it. So that's why Docker containers are incredibly small and fast. And you can run like 10 times as many Docker containers on a server as you could virtual machines. But anyway, that's why people run para-virtualization. This is how you can make more virtual machines on the same hardware, but they're all running on the real hardware with the same drivers. So you can't run too many different OSs on top of it. Anyway, so the hypervisor is the software that does this, that simulates hardware and has no S on it. The type 1 hypervisor runs on the bare metal, like ESXi. The type 2 runs an application in userland, like VMware Workstation. And both of them simulate hardware. So the point of this is you have lower hardware costs. This was confusing to me, but I went to a conference and they talked about this. And they said they had a fleet of servers at a company, like a restaurant company, and those servers got kind of old and were broken, and you couldn't buy parts from them anymore. But to make the cluster work, they all had to be the same. So they had a whole room full of broken old servers they had to keep harvesting used parts from to keep them going, and that was expensive and wasteful. And by making them all virtual, they were able to add brand new servers that were faster, that ran virtual machines with the same virtual hardware as the others. And now you can have different hardware underneath running identical virtual hardware so the cluster works. And this turns out to be much, much better. There are therefore security issues. If you're running many guests on the same host, then they are not separated by real air gap. They're just separated by some kind of permission between the virtual machines. And in fact, there have been VM escape attacks where you can get out of one machine into the host or out of one machine onto another machine. So it is, of course, riskier to have virtual machines running on the same physical hardware compared to having real air gaps between your different machines. So another thing is blinded by virtualization. This is already a big problem. If you try to monitor your network traffic with like a network intrusion detection system, where do you get the network traffic? If there's only one pipe to the internet, you can get that traffic, but what about traffic inside your company from a workstation to the file server, workstation to the domain controller? You're not seeing that. And if you have virtual traffic going from one virtual machine to another on the same host, how are you going to see that? You're going to have to add a virtual span port, virtual tap to that traffic. As you get more and more virtual software-defined networking, it gets harder and harder to monitor that. And so cloud computing has these levels. You have infrastructure as a service, where you get a virtual server. You've got platform as a service, where you run something like this, my web server. My main web server is on a web host. I don't control the OS. I don't put on the patches. Somebody else does that. I just put files in a folder and they get served, so it's always up to date and everything. And then there's software as a service, where you don't even have direct access to the file system. It's like Google Gmail. You just have a program and you can just do whatever that program lets you do. You don't even have access to the file system or anything. So those are the three types of cloud computing. So a lot of people are now making private clouds. The original idea was public clouds like EMC, Amazon EMC, and it turned out Elastic Cloud Computing. And it turned out that people found a whole lot of breaches, like all these open Amazon buckets. The number one concern as everyone moves to the cloud is security. People are worried if the data is really on somebody else's server, how do I know how many copies of it there are? Are there backups? Are they letting people steal it? And so a private cloud is where you have your own data center with your own physical hardware, and you call it a cloud because you share it to some extent over the internet, although usually only to your employees and customers. And so that's the difference between the public cloud and the private cloud. If you're going to use the public cloud, then you have to consider your service level agreement, because you do have to understand what they provide and what they don't. And one huge misconception is most people believe that their cloud provider provides security, and most cloud providers do not provide any security. The only thing they promise is uptime. They say protecting the data is your responsibility. But many people do not understand that. Amazon, for example, had an image that you could use. They had, for a while, they had a marketplace of customer-made images that you could just use to make a web server or a server with certain software running on it. And one of them, of course, was insecure. And you people are copying it and using it. They all had the same SSH key. This is what tends to happen when you have cloned machines. I don't think they have a customer-contributed marketplace anymore on the official Amazon site, because it turned out to be not that brilliant idea. Grid computing is another kind of cloud computing where you offer computing time to a cluster of many different machines. This was used to crack DES in 1997. 10,000 machines were working together to crack it. It's used by SETI at home to search for intelligent life in outer space. It's used by folding at home to do protein folding. If you have a huge complicated task that has some public good in it, you can get people to just volunteer some time on their machines. Then they all install a special screensaver or something, and their machines, when they're not using them, are all doing some portion of some huge calculation. So there are parallel systems which give you high performance, but they're sharing memory between them all. And this can create race conditions. Microsoft proposed this when they brought out Vista. They said they were going to make Vista faster by using RAM on other machines in your local area network when they needed more RAM, which would mean that I said, this is awesome for a hacker. They're just going to take other people's data and just put it right on my machine for me. This is awesome. And they eventually did not deploy that, but that's what this is. You can have systems that do that, but of course that does mean that 2 or 3 machines are trying to write to the same object at the same time, and unless you have carefully implemented locking, you will have weird problems where you can change it. Some machine writes it, then they come back later to read it, but somebody has changed it, and that's a race condition. All right, so peer-to-peer sharing, of course, you all know, like BitTorrent, a bunch of people share their files with other people, which means you can easily get them, and you're not downloading from any one central server, so there's not one central server for people to censor or take down. The problem is you don't know what you're getting. And now the BitTorrent protocol does make sure that it has not been modified. Every machine, every shard that you get, a little chunk of a file comes with a hash, and it verifies the hash. It means that shard is a faithful copy of the original, but you do not know that the original didn't have a virus, and often it does. And another problem is a lot of people just share their entire C drive by accident, a pile torrent, so all their personal files and everything are out there. That's how they got Obama's helicopter plans a few years ago. The contractor that was securing Obama's helicopter, Air Force Two, shared his entire C drive on BitTorrent. So it just went to foreign nations and everything. All right, that's why, top secret stuff should not be on personal machines. It's supposed to be on air-gapped, top secret machines. You cannot put it on lower classified machines. That's also how the NSA lost their shadow broker stuff. They took NSA attack tools, and somebody took them home and put them on his home machine where he had Kaspersky antivirus installed. Kaspersky antivirus said, this stuff is malware, and sent it to Russia. And they're like, how did this happen? Well, it should have stayed on top secret stuff that was air-gapped from home machines. Anyway, so thin clients are where you don't even have a whole computer. You typically don't have a hard drive at all. You just got a little connector like a terminal, and then the server has everything. The server has the desktop and the operating system and the applications and everything, and you're just viewing it. This is a high security solution for a lot of people where you don't have a local storage or anything. So what I've heard some people say is if you give everyone iPads, that they can't store any data at all, and they just access the server that way, it makes it more secure, but of course it's limited what you can do. And then there are diskless workstations used for this purpose, where everything is just loaded on the server. Then you got the Internet of Things, of course, all these little gadgets that are running web servers and everything else and connecting to the internet, and are making it possible for you to do things like check from home if your garage door is open if somebody's breaking into your house. But the current generation of them are notoriously unsafe in silly ways. So I got some cahoots about that stuff, which is 3D, which is here. See how the volume is. All right. And I should have a place to record winners, which I do. Good. Yeah, it's a good day for it. There's less competition. A couple of days ago, I taught a class and there were only 2 people in cahoots. That makes it pretty easy to win. This is how I got the black badge at DEF CON. I went to the contest where everybody else gave up and left. I said, hey. right. I don't know what that is, but I'm just, it's a turtle. Oh, cool. Okay. I'm guessing I know who the turtle is. There's some subtle clues. All right, so I'll give it another 5 seconds. I guess this is it. Off we go. All right. Okay, a security risk of VMs. Yep, VM escape. All right. If you want to get TC sec level A, what do you need? You need a reference monitor. That is the orange book. To get to A or B, you must have a reference monitor, which enforces these permissions, not letting you violate the security policy. What kind of service is Canvas, where you take your quizzes? That's software as a service. You are just running a program and you can just do whatever options they give you. You can't write your own programs or store your own files or anything. All right. All right, what system combines dissimilar computers together to get more power? Okay, that's grid computing. Okay, good. All right, so some winners. Who? I don't think that's a real name. Guess who? I'm guessing that's not a real name. And the turtle, which I deduced. Okay, good. So guess who will have to tell me who they are if they want to get the points? That's you. Okay, good. Okay, good. Then I will fill that in. Good. All right, so let's go back to here and all right, then you got security plus kind of stuff. So here's vulnerabilities. The Tempest project was the government's attempt to find out how bad radio emissions are, and it turns out they are very bad. If you, especially in those days when you used a CRT monitor, but even now, just a keyboard emits enough radio waves that with a sensitive radio, you can tell what people are typing, see what's on the screen, deduce cryptographic keys from the emanations from the processor, and so on. It turns out to be a big problem. Electronic computers are emitting radio that leaks information about what you're doing. So if you want to be really safe, you have to be in a windowless room with metal all around you.
Did you see the recent hack where they were changing the brightness of the monitor? And it was picking up, like, I guess they were able to communicate.
Yes, I saw it a while ago. Light bulbs and LED bulbs and monitors, it's a covert channel. You can flicker the screen and send messages around. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I knew one from a couple of years ago. I don't know the new one. Anyway, so covert channels are communications that violate your security policy where something is leaving and you don't know how. So you can put things in a temp file and others can see it. That's one option. You can use timing channels. Like I say, you can measure how long it takes to reject a bad password. And sometimes you can deduce information about the key by subtly measuring millions of those. Backdoors are unexpected ways in that are not approved that violate your security policy, like a special username and password. There was a survey a few years ago at the register where they asked how many network administrators had installed backdoors on their servers that the management did not know about, and the answer was 80%. And they asked them, how many of you would get fired if your boss found out? And the answer was 80%. Because the typical situation is you're not allowed to have a backdoor. Then your boss calls you, you're surfing in Hawaii and says, the server's down, you have to fix it. And so you have to have a backdoor, but they won't really let you have one. And so anyway, hopefully it's better now with these modern compliance policies where people actually understand you should have some controlled, authorized backdoor. But anyway, another thing people do a lot, incredible lot, is just put hard-coded passwords for maintenance. Cisco had like 8 of these in the last year come out. Hard-coded passwords, an incredible amount of people are doing this. It's a really old habit. It's in the movie Tron. The kid gets on the system because his dad would always use a certain name and password, and he knew that. And a lot of people are still doing that. That was an old thing from like the 80s. Anyway, so then of course there's all the malware out there, and then there's zero-day exploits if you're elite enough or you're spending enough money to buy them, where there is no patch even if people have everything up to date. So viruses are code attached to an exe file. They used to spread on floppy disks. The more common type is macroviruses in Microsoft Office documents. And there's a bunch of other versions, which originally were spread on floppies, and now there are more modern versions of them. Worms propagate without being attached to a file, and that's technically what almost all modern threats are. Trojans lie about what they do. And rootkits take over the root of the system, affecting its fundamental operation. The most extreme rootkit being Joanna Rutkowska's blue pill, which turns your machine into a virtual machine. So another process can run and you can't see it at all. And that's what they all kind of do. They cause ring kernel rootkits, change the fundamental operation of the machine so it no longer does what it's supposed to be doing. Anyway, there are packers that compress executables and obfuscate them so they won't get caught by antivirus, hopefully. And then they have a decompressor built in the front like a self-extracting zip file. UPX is a common open source packer. And there are Russian forums where you can pay $30 and a guy will just write you a custom packer. It's one thing I've often wanted to do. I haven't got around to it in like the malware analysis class, but you could totally learn to write your own packer in Python or Go or C. It really doesn't have to be anything super fantastic. Just have to flip a few of the bits and then have something in front to unflip the bits. And if it's not just a known recognized packer, then of course all signature-based products will not detect it. Logic bombs wait for some kind of trigger condition like a date and then do something unusual. They found one of these on Fannie Mae that would have wiped out all their systems. Somehow they found it before it went off, which is pretty surprising because these are almost always custom written. I don't really know how you would find it. Antivirus software typically uses a signature looking for an exact attack that's in its known database. There is heuristic-based detection, but usually the sensitivity is turned way down low because a lot of innocent software looks like a virus. Like it comes as a zip file, it unzips, it gets bigger, it makes network connections. If you do heuristic detection, you typically annoy the user with a bunch of warnings for innocent software. So server-side attacks attack a server somehow, like in Microsoft servers, if you expose SMB, there's just an endless chain of attacks from the internal blue to, that's a very vulnerable process. So you're able to implant malware on a server. And then there's client-side attacks, where you trick the user into downloading some evil file like a PHP or Flash or an EXE or something and running it, or PowerShell is commonly used in pen testing. Both of those give you some foothold into a network. So web servers often have vulnerabilities. If you have PHP, the typical way it's used is you have a parameter that is a file name. So it's often possible to change the parameter to point somewhere unexpected, like to a different local file than you should be seeing, or a different remote file on another server. And those are called local file inclusion or remote file inclusion. Vulnerabilities are the most common problem with PHP. Another huge one, of course, is SQL injection when PHP is used with SQL. Applets or Java applets, I don't think people are using these much anymore. I used to have a browser plugin that would run Java, and that turned out to be extremely dangerous. So was ActiveX, which was Microsoft's technology to do the same thing. Both of these, I think, have pretty much gone the way of the dodo bird and replaced by HTML5, which is much more secure. OWASP, of course, has their top 10 vulnerabilities for web applications, starting with code injection and going on to things like cross-site scripting and unvalidated redirects and so on. We've talked about this a lot in the other classes. Hopefully you know your OWASP top 10. These are the main vulnerabilities you see on web servers, and they are very persistent. They've been doing this for about 10 years, and it doesn't ever change much. The same problems come back over and over and over. XML is just a way, is the general type of language of which HTML is a special case. It's just a way to organize data. So you give everything a name, and you have an opening tag, and then the contents, and then a closing tag, just a way to lay out data. Service-oriented architecture is a way to have multiple apps use the same service. So this is the point. Instead of having every program that wants to print have to write its own print driver, you have something like a print driver just listening, and they all use the same code for that. That's the thing. You have a directory of services, and your other software just uses the same service, sharing services. In Linux, it was very common to have static compilation where every program would have a complete copy of the library it's using, which made them independent. But in Windows, they share libraries, or dynamic link libraries, and that is faster to load and uses less memory, but it is more unsanitary. And there's a bunch of attacks that involve putting up a dangerous DIL and then tricking someone into using the wrong DIL. Anyway, there's web services. XML and JSON are just other ways to organize data besides XML, and SOAP and REST are more ways to do it. And in general, you can use a web services description language, which is a way you can ask a server, what services do you offer and what format does the data have to come in, and it will tell you, and then you can send data in the correct format. So databases have their own security issues. This is where everyone stores a large amount of data, like all your customer addresses and your employee addresses and social security numbers and such. So there are going to be low security data in the database that anybody's allowed to see, and there's going to be high security database that nobody but the administrator should see. And there are inference attacks and aggregations are ways to see data beyond your clearance level. So the database has a primary key. Usually there's a number. This is why everybody has to give you a card. At every loyalty card, you have this number, Safeway card and everything, because they have to somehow identify you. And you might have the same name as somebody else or the same birthday as somebody else. There's nothing else they can do but give you your own number. So that's the idea. That's called the primary key, the unique identifier of a person. Polyinstantiation is where you allow two rows to have the same primary key but different data for different clearance levels. So the top secret people will see all the data, but the lower clearance people will only see the data they're cleared to see, and they will not know that there is other data also with the same primary key. That's a way to avoid some of these attacks. One, you can infer restricted information from lower level, like the one I mentioned before. If you watch how many pizzas are ordered at night in the Pentagon, you can tell whether they're planning a major military move, making everyone stay late. So that is a low privilege piece of data that you can use to deduce something about a high privilege piece of data. And another one is aggregation, where you take many low-level facts and add them together. Like you can just try every phone number on a whole list, or every possible value of the primary key, and the ones you can't access must be the high security ones. So now you know how many there are and where to look further. So one solution is to try to escalate all the pizza deliveries up to the top secret clearance, which seems kind of impractical. Another solution is polyinstantiation, where the record of those transactions always gives you an answer, even if there is another thing you're not cleared to see. And another thing is to limit the number of queries people can make. So they cannot query many thousands of queries on your database to find out, get enough information to deduce the things they're not seeing. Data mining is the general practice of searching through a huge database like the whole internet to find something like customers or secrets or something. Credit card companies do this to find suspicious transactions. And this is also called data analytics, to try to find out if somebody is doing something wrong on your network. You have to have some kind of measurement of what normal activity is. This is very important. This is, until we switched to chip cards, this was the only security credit card transactions had in America. Everybody was using numbers, where every time you use the number, you've given your merchant a blank check to just keep taking more money out forever. And the only thing that protected you was the credit card companies finding the suspicious transactions, and they got very good at it. And they hired bright mathematicians like Allison, forget her last name. She gave a talk here, who was a real mathematician who knew game theory. That's what it takes, advanced math, to know the smartest way to find what is suspicious out of this huge mess of data. Allison Miller, that was her name. I think now she's on the top board of the people that make the CISSP, ISC squared. Anyway, so for countermeasures, you got multiple overlapping controls, administrative controls, and physical controls. These are your layers of security. So that even if somebody gets through one layer of security, there's hopefully another layer of security behind them that gives you another chance to stop an attack. Mobile devices are a huge problem. There was a long time, until 2002, Microsoft recommended that you would just have one firewall protecting your whole network, because then all the computers were like these ones, just attached to a table, and you go to work and work on that one company machine. But now everybody has laptops and iPhones and thumb drives and iPods and everything. And so you can't really control what machine they're using. And so we're moving to a zero trust network, where you do not assume that any of those machines are really obeying your security policy. Assume that they're out of compliance, have malware on them and such, and plan for that, because in reality that is probably true. So you can have For controlled mobile devices, you can restrict things like try to block people using USB devices or make them use only the company trusted USB devices. Now that I'm working for a military contractor, we have this air-gapped machine and you have to do everything on that machine and you can't ever take anything off and work on any other machine. And so one of the guys took a trip to another country and he hasn't been able to do any work at all. Because if you don't have that machine, you can't do anything. So, it's very annoying, but that is the air-gapped security model. That's one way to go. So to try to do something to prevent the harm of theft, you back up the data on the mobile device so you won't lose the data, and you encrypt the data so a person who stole the device can't get it, and you have remote wipe to try to make sure that data is gone when it leaves your control. Those are common countermeasures. All right, so we're up to E, and E is here. All right. Oh, I forgot about the alternative music they have now. A major enhancement. All right, I'll give it 5 more seconds, but I think this is all we're going to get. All right. So what is it the FBI wants on iPhones? They want a backdoor, everybody knows that. All right. What language tends to have LFI vulns? That's PHP is famous for that, local file inclusion. All right. What attack searches a large database for useful information? That's data mining, good. And looks like the crab is on top. And what threat destroys a system on a certain date? Okay. So, well, oh, there's another one, okay. Which organization puts out the top 10 list of web vulns? All right. Okay, OWASP, it's not NIST, it's OWASP. You might imagine NIST would do it, but they don't. So VU is up to 6. And guess who is up to 6? And the crab wins, all right? So it's the usual suspects. So, all right. All right, we got one more section. And this is all basically security plus review kind of stuff. So now it's a little bit of cryptography, more security plus stuff. So cryptology is the science, cryptography is secret writing, and cryptanalysis is breaking encrypted messages in an unexpected way, like without the key. So a cipher is the algorithm used to change plain text into ciphertext. Plain text is files you can read and use. Ciphertext is scrambled stuff you can no longer use. So confidentiality is the main thing you get out of cryptography. Attackers cannot read the ciphertext, so secrets remain secret. Also, you tend to get integrity in that this is not as strong at all, though it's not the main point of cryptography. If you encrypt something, you'd like to think that an attacker cannot create valid ciphertext by modifying it. The main thing that gives you integrity is hashing, which is different than encryption. So authentication verifies the identity of a user. Non-repudiation means that your audit records are reliable, so people cannot deny what they did. I have a record, you did this, you did that, you can't deny it because I authenticated you and I made sure nobody could modify the records. This is why, for example, normal Microsoft server logs are not useful in court typically because they are just like plain text files or easily modified files, and they don't have signatures or anything to verify that they have not been modified. So that's, if you really want court level logging, you use third-party logging solutions that create files and sign them and digitally sign them or something so you can prove that they were not altered. Confusion is a desirable property of encryption where you cannot, the properties of the plain text are no longer visible in the ciphertext, so it looks different. And diffusion means that the input, if you change one character in the plain text, it will change all characters all over the place in the ciphertext, not just in one place. Substitution is one process where you just replace each character with another, and this provides confusion. Permutation is where you just rearrange the letters, and that provides diffusion. Simple substitution and simple permutation are very weak and not strong enough for modern use, but they are part of complicated algorithms like AES that are secure. So strong encryption means it is difficult or effectively impossible to decrypt without the key on any computer that anybody can afford to use. The work factor measures how hard it is to get, and this one common mistake is making a system and hoping to hide the algorithm and calling it strong for that reason. This turns out to be a terrible idea because sophisticated crypt analysts can figure out what you've done and crack it and guess the algorithm. It is far better to use a well-known system like AES and tell everybody you're using AES and just have it saying it's so strong that you can't get in without the key than to try to use something else and lie about what you're using. Although the military does both. It's both, they use strong, well-known strong algorithms and they conceal what they're using. So monoalphabetic systems replace one letter with another letter, and every time the same letter appears, they replace it with the same letter, like the Caesar cipher. This is easy to break with frequency analysis. The most common letter in English is E, so if I have a couple paragraphs of ciphertext, I can just see what the most common letter is, and that will be E. Polyalphabetic ciphers use multiple possible substitutions for each letter, so it is less vulnerable to frequency analysis. All of this is done with modular arithmetic, like a clock. You're going around a loop, so you have bytes, say from 0 to 255, and when you go past that, it goes back down to 0, so that you don't have the encryption stuff be bigger than the plain text typically. It's modular arithmetic. Exclusive OR is an essential part of most site encryption. Exclusive OR, just like substitution and permutation, is not secure when used alone, but it is part of secure systems. It just mix these together. So if you have 0 and 0 or 1 and 1, if the two bits are the same, the answer is 0. But if the two bits are different, like 0 and 1 or 1 and 0, the answer is 1. That's exclusive OR. If two things are different, the answer is 1. If two things are the same, the answer is 0. This reverses itself. If you take attack at dawn and encrypt it with Apple, 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 it turns into this garbage with $signs. And if you again encrypt it with Apple, 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 it becomes clear. 2 rounds of exclusive OR gets you right back where you started. Because wherever there is a 1 in the key, you flip the bit. And wherever there's a 1 in the key, you flip the bit again. That's all it is. It's just flipping some of the bits. That's all exclusive OR is. Encrypting data at rest is what you have with like BitLocker, where when the machine is turned off, the data is encrypted so the person who steals the whole machine can't get it. Encrypting data in motion is while it's in transit. This is what Apple is planning to do to WhatsApp and their other Facebook Messenger and stuff, which makes the FBI all upset. So nobody can get it while it's being sent. This is what VPNs give you. You get a VPN, now all your data is encrypted in transit from you to the VPN provider, and nobody in between can get in unless they got the key. What's that? Yes, HTTPS is another encryption of data in motion. That's right, all the way to the endpoint, exactly. And there's a HTTPS, you have a key, which is only like you talk to Gmail. The key is only Gmail has the key to read what you send to them, and only you have the key to come back to read what they send back to you, so nobody else can read either of them unless somebody can steal one of the keys at the end or break the system in other ways. So then you got to choose appropriate encryption methods. There are many algorithms, and you have to weigh these considerations. How strong does it have to be? How fast do you want it? How complicated and expensive are you willing to make it, and so on. You have to make, just like all other kinds of security, you have to make a judgment after doing threat modeling of what is appropriate for your condition. All right, so we're up to 3F. And here we go. Aha, there we go. Now we're up to 5. I think that's it. I'll give it a few seconds. All right, I like the music. So, Caesar cipher moves each letter 3 steps in the alphabet. So what's that? That's a substitution cipher. Each letter is substituted with another letter. What's 3 XOR 4? Those are numbers, not ASCII. Okay, it's 7, which is not a popular answer, so let me talk about it here. So 3 is 0, 1, 1. That's no 4s, 1, 2, and 1, 1. 4 is 1, 0, 0. So if you XOR them, you get 1, 1, 1, which is 7. All right, that's what you do. You just take the bits, and if the 2 bits are different, the answer is 1. All right. So let's go to the next one. What systems resist frequency analysis? Polyalphabetic, that's their virtue. Polyalphabetic ciphers resist frequency analysis. The most extreme one is the one-time pad, which resists all frequency analysis. All right, a photo shows Jeff at a meeting, so he can't deny it. What does that provide? That's non-repudiation. This was topical when I wrote it a couple of years ago. Jeff Sessions, one of some people who's now gone, announced that he was not at a meeting, and then they had on Twitter pictures of him at that meeting. So one of the many times the Trump officials were just blatantly lying about something that was trivial to prove that they were lying. Anyway, what is 17 mod 5? All right, it's 2. What you do is you divide by the modulus and you keep the remainder. So 17 is 3 5s plus 2, and the 2 is the modulus. All right. So the winners, guess who? All right, that's 9. And Fu, looks like I'm getting the same winners every time so far. And there we are, a ballerina or something of that sort. Or a dancing person anyway. All right, good. So, all right, so we're right on time. Let's take a 10-minute break, and at 5 after 7, we'll do the student presentations. So I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll make a separate